Now here's the thing the galaxy got wrong. They thought Terrans were finally losing. What they didn't realize was nobody had told the retired ones to stay out of it. Now, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to hear it the way it's meant. Not the way folks like to dress things up after the fact. Terrans don't run. Oh, they'll reposition, they'll regroup, they'll give up a mile here or there if it buys them something better down the line. But running, real running, where you're giving ground and you ain't got it already figured how you're going to take it back. That ain't us. That ain't how we're built. So when I tell you I sat there and watched Terran ships falling back across the Karsis Quadrant, slow and steady like a tide going the wrong direction, you'll understand why that got my attention real quick. I was retired at the time, at least that's what the paperwork said, which mostly meant nobody expected me to do nothing except sit quiet and observe. Had myself a little relay station well behind the lines, not much traffic, not much excitement, just a lot of bad coffee and a front row seat to people younger than me trying real hard to hold together a situation that was coming apart one careful piece at a time. The war had already been underway a few weeks, and at first it looked like every other fight Terrans ever got into, loud, messy, full of confidence, the kind of fight where you just wait for the moment somebody screws up and then everything tilts in your favor. Only problem was this one didn't tilt. See, the enemy in that quadrant, they didn't behave the way most species do when they think they're winning. They didn't get loud, didn't get proud, didn't start taking risks, trying to finish things quicker. They just kept coming. Same pressure, same pace, same clean execution every single time, like they were building the victory instead of chasing it. No wasted motion, no bad calls, no openings. And that right there is a problem because Terrans make a living off other people's mistakes. You take those away, you don't just make things harder, you make things even. And even is a place Terrans don't much care to fight from. You didn't need a tactical display to know how bad it was getting. You could hear it in the comms if you knew what to listen for. Messages got shorter. Jokes disappeared. Folks started hesitating just a fraction too long before answering, like maybe if they waited, somebody else might say it instead. Orders got repeated, not because anybody missed them, but because nobody liked hearing them the first time. That kind of silence creeps in real slow, and once it settles, it don't leave easy. By the third week, they weren't talking about holding ground anymore. They were talking about buying time, and I don't care who you are, that phrase ought to make you uneasy. Buying time means somebody's fixing to pay for it later, and usually they don't get a say in the matter. I remember sitting there watching the overlays drift backward toward core Terran lanes, one grid at a time, and hearing a young officer say it plain as day over the net that they couldn't hold the outer grid. No argument followed, no raised voices, just a quiet acknowledgement like everybody had already made their peace with it, and that's when it settled in for me that this wasn't one bad fight or one bad decision. The Terrans weren't losing a battle, they were losing the whole damn quadrant. Now, right about the time that realization started sitting heavy, something else showed up, and at first it didn't look like much, just a little noise in the backfield telemetry. Weak signals drifting in from behind Terran lines where there shouldn't have been much of anything except scrap routes and decommission lanes. Half the signatures matched ships that had been cut apart years ago, and the other half didn't exist on any registry worth mentioning. The drive patterns were worse, all uneven and mismatched, like somebody had taken whatever engines they could get their hands on, bolted them together without asking permission, and just hoped they'd agree on which way was forward. Most of the younger officers wrote it off as ghost traffic, censored junk, echoes from old wreckage, and truth be told, if you were just looking at the data, that's exactly what it ought to have been. But I'd seen that kind of junk before, a long time ago, in a different war where things got just about this bad, and I remember leaning back in my chair, taking another sip of that terrible coffee and watching those signals crawl a little closer to the edge of the fight. Slow and crooked and uncoordinated, but steady in a way that didn't sit right. So I muttered to myself, quiet enough that nobody'd feel the need to ask me what I meant, and I said, "Well now, that don't look like junk, Because the thing about old Terrans is they stay retired right up until somebody does something stupid, and from where I was sitting, it looked an awful lot like somebody had just gone and done exactly that. Now those signals I was watching, they didn't go away like ghost traffic's supposed to. If anything, they got clearer, not cleaner, mind you, just closer. Strong enough that folks couldn't ignore them anymore, even if they didn't much like what they were seeing. One by one, those signatures crept up on the edge of confirmed space, and that's when somebody finally bothered to put optics on them instead of just cursing at the telemetry. And I'll tell you right now, that didn't help matters. What showed up on those scopes didn't look like any fleet that had business being anywhere near a live combat zone. Hulls were mismatched, plating didn't line up right, scorch marks older than some of the officers reading the reports. You could see where the sections had been cut out, replaced, bolted back on with whatever fit at the time. One ship had 3 different armor tones across the same flank, like it couldn't quite remember what it used to be. Another had a drive signature that wobbled just enough to make every navigator in the quadrant uncomfortable. These weren't ships you sent into a war. These were ships you sent to die, quiet-like. Command didn't know what to make of it. Registry checks came back empty or worse, flagged vessels that had been officially scrapped years ago. A couple of them had decommissioned records older than the officers trying to identify them. The whole thing smelled like a paperwork error that had gotten out of hand, except paperwork errors don't drift into active war zones on a steady heading. And that's when the first transmission came through. No priority tag, no identification string, no proper handshake like any respectable Terran vessel would use in the middle of a fight. Just a clean, open channel like somebody leaning back in a chair talking across a fence. Afternoon, boys. Y'all look like you're having a rough time of it. Thought we might come see if you needed a hand. I remember sitting up a little straighter when I heard that, because there are certain tones you don't forget no matter how long you've been out. Calm, unhurried, not a single trace of concern in it, like the man speaking hadn't quite gotten the memo that there was a war on. The response from command wasn't nearly as friendly. They demanded identification, registry codes, authorization, the usual list of things people ask for when something shows up where it shouldn't be, and starts talking like it belongs there. What they got back wasn't any of that. "Now we ain't here to cause trouble," the voice said. Same easy cadence, same porch chair confidence. "Heard things were going sideways for y'all. Figured we'd come take a look, maybe help settle things down a bit." That didn't go over well. You could hear the irritation start to creep in. Orders came back sharper this time. Clear instructions to stay out of the combat zone, clear the area, and identify immediately or be treated as unauthorized vessels. Standard procedure. Clean, professional, and completely ignored, because instead of breaking off, those ships just kept coming, slow, crooked, like they didn't have the good sense to know they were out of place. That's when we got a better look at them, and I'll admit, even I wasn't quite ready for what we were seeing. One of them, big old hull, sitting just a little too steady for how rough the rest of it looked, had markings buried under layers of patchwork plating that some of the older systems managed to pull up. Took a second for it to click, but when it did, I just kind of exhaled and shook my head. The Vengeance, or what was left of her. Last I'd heard, she'd been scheduled for dismantling years back, same as a dozen other warships that had outlived their official usefulness. But there she was, not just intact, but carrying enough unauthorized modifications, make an entire procurement office pass out. Trailing her at a distance was another one, smaller, faster, twitchier in the way it moved. The Sable Finch, if the partial registry was to be believed, though I couldn't swear to it with the amount of work that had been done to her. She moved like she'd been tuned by someone who didn't much care for factory limits. And then there was the ugly one. Every group's got one, and this one answered to the name Mildred, though I'd be willing to bet that wasn't what she'd started life as. That ship looked like it had been built out of arguments and bad decisions. Sections didn't line up, structural supports sat where they had no business being, and whatever was humming inside her Didn't match any engine profile I'd ever seen. She drifted just a little off axis, like gravity itself wasn't entirely convinced she belonged in the same space as everything else. I remember one officer saying that those ships shouldn't even be operational, and I couldn't help but chuckle a bit at that, because operational wasn't really the word I'd have used. Functional, maybe. Stubborn, definitely. About that time, one of the ships adjusted course just a hair, and you could see something spark and flicker along one of the outer hull plates. Before command could even comment on it, another voice cut across the same open channel, this one a bit rougher, like somebody talking while they were elbow deep in machinery. "Clyde, you fixed that, or you just admiring it?" "It's fixed," came the reply, quick and irritated. "If it wasn't, we'd all know by now." "Don't sound fixed." "It ain't supposed to sound pretty, it's supposed to work." That got a few looks across the comm net, I can tell you that much. Meanwhile, command was still trying to get control of the situation, repeating orders, demanding compliance, warning them again to clear out of the combat zone before they caused more problems than they solved. And I reckon that's the moment I knew how this was going to go, because those ships didn't turn. Didn't slow, didn't even acknowledge the warnings beyond a casual appreciate the concern, like somebody had just told them to watch their step on a loose board. They just kept drifting forward, right toward the edge of a fight the Terrans were slowly losing, moving like they had all the time in the world, and not a single reason to be worried about how bad things had gotten. And I remember setting my cup down, watching those old, broken, absolutely out-of-place ships ease their way toward the line, and thinking to myself, this was either about to get a whole lot worse, or at least a whole lot more interesting. Now, wars like that don't stop just because something strange shows up on the edge of the field. The enemy kept pressing, same as they had been, steady and deliberate, like they were following a plan nobody on the Terran side had quite figured out how to break yet. Terran lines pulled back another notch, formations tightening, ships repositioning to cover gaps that were getting harder and harder to fill, and right in the middle of all that, those old ships just drifted in like they hadn't noticed a war was going on at all. No formation, no coordination, no permission. Just three ghosts wandering into a live firefight like they were late to a job nobody asked them to take. Command tried again, and you could hear it in the tone, tight, controlled, just this side irritated, telling them to clear the zone, saying they were interfering with active operations, warning they were about to get themselves killed if they didn't turn around and head back where they came from. There was a pause, just long enough to feel like maybe this time they'd listen, and then that same calm voice came back, clearer now. "This is Captain Henry Caldwell, retired, or at least it was last time I checked. I got my whole crew of has-beens and bad knees. We ain't here to interfere, son. We're here 'cause you look like you could use a hand." That didn't go over well. "Captain Caldwell," command snapped back. "You are operating an unregistered vessel inside an active combat zone. You will disengage immediately." Another pause, shorter this time, and then real easy, like he was talking to someone who just didn't know any better. "Son, I've been disengaged for near 20 years. Don't seem to have taken." Somewhere on the net, somebody muted themselves just a second too late, and you could hear a quiet, "Well, that ain't good." About that time, one of the enemy ships did what they'd been doing all war, pushing just a little too far forward, testing the Terran line, looking for that next clean break. And from somewhere off to the side, over a channel nobody had authorized, came another voice, rougher, distracted, like somebody talking with one hand buried inside a machine. "Thor, you seen that one drifting out ahead?" "I see it." "You gonna take it?" "Reckon I might." Command cut in immediately, sharp now. "Unknown vessel, do not engage. I repeat, do not." "Already ahead of you," Thor muttered, and command tried again, louder this time, but they never got to finish that sentence because Mildred answered first. There wasn't any build-up, no warning tone, no clean firing sequence like a proper military system would have given you. Just a low shift in that strange hum she carried around with her. And then reality itself seemed to slip. That enemy cruiser, clean lines, steady shields, sitting just outside Terran reach, lost its front third like it had been erased mid-thought. Gone. No explosion, no flare, no debris the way it ought to have been. Just not there. For about half a second, the rest of the ship kept going like it didn't realize it was already dead, and then physics caught up and everything behind that missing section came apart in a way that made a whole lot of people very uncomfortable. Dead silence across the comms, and then somebody finally said what everybody else was thinking. What the hell was that? Nobody had an answer, except apparently the people who did it. Told you she'd reach, Thor said, calm as could be. That wasn't reach, another voice snapped back, Griggs by the sound of it. That was drift. You're off alignment again. I ain't off. You're always off. She hit it, didn't she? Yeah. And took half the math with it. That right there did more damage than the shot itself, because they weren't surprised, they weren't impressed. They were arguing like that kind of thing happened often enough to be worth complaining about. Before anyone could regain control of the situation, Caldwell's voice came back over the net, smooth as ever. Well, now, that's interesting. Been a while since I seen her do that clean. That wasn't clean, Griggs muttered. Cleaner than last time. Last time we lost a whole engine bay. Still flew. And right there, right in the middle of a fight the Terrans had been slowly losing for weeks, somebody on an open combat channel laughed. Didn't last long, but it was there. Mildred shifted again just a little, like she was thinking about what she'd done, and then that hum built up just enough to make every engineer listening real nervous. Clyde, Caldwell said, you might want to check that resonance before they start complaining. It's stable, Clyde shot back immediately. Define stable, someone muttered. It ain't exploding, is it? Not currently. That ain't reassuring, another voice added. Then Mildred fired again, and this time it wasn't clean at all. The middle section of another enemy ship just vanished, leaving the front and back hanging there for a heartbeat, like they were considering staying together out of sheer stubbornness before they gave up and tore themselves apart. And that's when everything changed. Terran comms lit up, not panicked, not confused, awake. Did you see that? Whatever that was, do it again. Who the hell are those people? The enemy fleet pulled back just enough to reassess, not retreat, not panic, not yet, but adjust, because for the first time since this war started, there was something on the field that didn't follow the rules, didn't fit the model, didn't behave in any way that made sense. And I remember leaning forward, watching those three old ships drift a little further into the fight, listening to those voices argue like they were fixing a truck instead of breaking a fleet, and thinking to myself, well, now, this just got interesting. Now, up to that point, the enemy had been fighting a clean war, the kind you can map out and trust, every move measured, every push calculated, every result built off what came before it. And even with Mildred tearing holes in ships and the Finch making a nuisance of herself, they still thought they could solve it if they just applied enough pressure in the right place. So they shifted, tightened up, brought more ships to bear, and started leaning on those three old wrecks the same way they'd been leaning on the Terran line, expecting the same result they'd been getting all along. And that right there was where it all started to come apart, because they still thought they were dealing with ships, and they weren't. They were dealing with old Terrans who didn't fight problems. They interpreted them. Mildred kept humming and drifting, occasionally reaching out and removing pieces of reality like she was clearing her throat, and the Sable Finch was already slipping through places she had no business being, cutting across targeting lines and cluttering up clean formations until nothing quite lined up the way it was supposed to anymore. But the Vengeance, she'd been quiet up to that point, holding just off the Terran flank like she was taking the measure of the whole mess. And I reckon that was Caldwell, watching, learning, figuring out exactly how much trouble he wanted to cause. When he finally spoke, it wasn't loud and it wasn't rushed, just that same calm tone like he was addressing a minor inconvenience instead of a fleet engagement. All right, he said, I believe we've seen enough. And Command jumped in right on top of him, trying one more time to assert some kind of control. reminding him he was unauthorized, out of position, and very much not supposed to be doing whatever it was he was about to do. Caldwell let him finish, gave it just enough pause to be polite, and then said, "Son, you keep talking like I'm asking permission." And that was about the last time anybody tried to tell him what to do. The Vengeance shifted then just a bit, bringing her broadside into a position Terran ships had been avoiding for weeks. Because it was too exposed, too easy to punish, too obvious a mistake, and Caldwell took it anyway, like he'd decided the problem wasn't the position. It was how you used it. "Clyde," he said, "easy as you please. You still got those rail clusters tied into that old fire control?" And Clyde came back without missing a beat. "Depends. You want 'em accurate or you want 'em interesting?" And Caldwell said, "I want 'em where I point 'em." And Clyde muttered, "Then don't blink." What came off that ship didn't look like any Terran firing pattern I'd ever seen. It wasn't a clean volley, wasn't synchronized, didn't follow any doctrine worth teaching. It just came out uneven, staggered in a way that made no sense until you realized that was the point. First shot hit a forward destroyer hard enough to fold its shields in on themselves. Second shot didn't follow the same line at all, didn't even pretend to. It shifted mid-flight like the targeting solution had changed its mind halfway there and punched through a cruiser sitting 2 ships back like it had been planned that way from the start. Caldwell went quiet for a second, then said, "Clyde, that ain't regulation." And Clyde answered, "Nope." And Caldwell said, "Keep it." "You got the guided ones locked in yet?" asked Caldwell. "Pretty sure we got it now," Clyde replied. A volley of 40 rails shot out of the Vengeance. They were spinning like bottle rockets. "That don't look good," said Caldwell. Just then they started swinging around on their own like they were hunting. Each rail was programmed to hit a reactor core on each ship. The rods penetrated. There was an internal explosion, then the ships drifted dark and dead in space, and that was when the enemy's model broke. Up until then, everything had rules, even if they didn't fully understand them, but now they were watching weapons behave in ways that couldn't be predicted, couldn't be simulated, couldn't be reduced down into something neat and solvable. Caldwell didn't ease off either. He leaned into it like he'd finally found the right lever to pull. "Bring up the auxiliary package," he said, and Clyde answered, "You mean the one we ain't supposed to have?" And Caldwell said, "That would be the one." And just like that, the Vengeance lit up in a way no official Terran warship ever would. Power routed through systems that weren't designed to talk to each other. Weapons cycling in combinations that would have given a regulation engineer heart failure. And somehow, it all worked. Not clean, not efficient, not pretty, but effective in a way that made the enemy hesitate. Because their shields started failing in ways that didn't match the hits they were taking. Their formation started breaking because they couldn't predict where the next shot was going or what it was going to do when it got there. And that steady, methodical push they'd been relying on started to lose its shape. The Sable Finch took advantage of that immediately, slipping straight through a gap that hadn't existed a second earlier, darting inside a formation that had been airtight just moments before, and somebody on the Terran net shouted that she was out of position, needed to pull back, and the pilot came back cheerful as could be. "Nah, they'll move." And sure enough, they did. Because nobody likes a problem sitting that close to home. Out on the flank, Caldwell watched it all like he had expected it, like this was just the natural result of letting things run the way they wanted to run instead of the way they were supposed to. "Thor," he said, "you keep that thing of yours pointed away from me. We'll get along just fine." And Thor answered, "No promises." And Caldwell just said, "Figured as much." And a second later, Mildred hummed again, and somewhere out there, another ship stopped existing in a way that didn't quite follow the rules. By then, Terran comms weren't quiet anymore, and they weren't panicked either. They were alive again. Voices sharper, quicker, just a hint of that old confidence coming back. Like it had been waiting for an excuse. The enemy, though, that perfect rhythm they'd been running on since the start of the war, it started to slip just a little at first and then a little more. Because they weren't fighting a fleet anymore. They were fighting 3 different ideas at the same time, and none of them made a damn bit of sense. And I remember leaning forward, watching the Vengeance sit in a position nobody else would have dared take, watching her fire solutions bend just enough to break expectations. And listening to Caldwell talk like this was all just another problem that needed sorting out, and I couldn't help but grin, because right about then, the enemy stopped pushing and started hesitating. And in a fight like that, that's all it takes. The fleet commander chimed in again. "Where the hell did those weapons come from?" he yelled. "It all looks like a combination of danger and bad ideas." "Well, then you are definitely not going to like this," came the reply. Now, if that had been the end of it, that might have been enough. 3 old ships fighting like bad ideas, held together with stubbornness, breaking just enough of the enemy's rhythm to let the Terrans catch their breath and maybe claw back a little ground. That would have been a good story all on its own, but it wasn't the whole story. See, all through that mess, there'd been 2 more signals sitting quiet in the background, easy to miss if you didn't know what you were looking for. Smaller, tighter, moving just a little too smooth compared to everything else those old boys had brought with them. They didn't broadcast, didn't chatter, didn't argue over open channels like the rest of that crew seemed to enjoy doing. They just waited. And I remember squinting at the board, noticing those 2 signatures firing up inside the Vengeance, and I muttered to myself, "Well now, there you are," because I'd heard about those 2 long before I ever saw them, Jake and Riley. Now officially they'd been listed as retired specialists in asymmetric ordnance development, which is a polite way of saying if you gave them a pile of scrap, a crate of unstable material, and just enough time to get bored, they'd build something that made people real uncomfortable at the policy level. Most of what they made never got approved. Some of it never got understood, and a few things got quietly buried in reports that nobody was supposed to read twice. Boom balls were one of those. Now, I ain't going to pretend the name inspires confidence, but I'll tell you this much. It stuck. About that time, the Vengeance shifted just enough that you could see a section of her hull open up that hadn't been there before, and 2 small shapes dropped free like they'd been waiting for permission nobody was ever going to give them. Old fighters by the look of them, but not the kind you'd ever mistake for museum pieces. These had been worked on, rebuilt, adjusted in ways that didn't match anything standard. "Caldwell," came a voice over the comm, younger than the others, but carrying that same easy confidence. "You finally gonna let us play, or you just gonna hog all the fun?" Caldwell didn't hesitate. "Try not to make a mess, I gotta explain." "No promises," the second voice said. And just like that, they were gone. Not in a flash, not in some fancy maneuver. They just moved, smooth and deliberate, cutting straight toward the edge of the enemy formation like they already knew exactly where they were going and how long they had to get there. Command noticed immediately. "Unidentified fighters, you are entering a restricted combat zone. You need to—" Yeah, one of them cut in. "We heard you the first time. You are not authorized to engage." That's never really stopped us before. Now the enemy saw them too, of course. Small targets, fast, not immediately threatening compared to the damage the bigger ships were already doing. A couple of ships adjusted position, brought point defense systems online, started tracking those fighters the way you would any minor nuisance in a larger engagement. And that right there was their last mistake. First shot didn't look like much. No missile trail, no energy build up. Just a quick, almost lazy flicker from one of those fighters, like somebody had tossed something instead of fired it. The round hit the enemy cruiser's shields and went right through. No flare, no resistance, just passed clean into the hull like the shield hadn't even been there. There was a few seconds where nothing happened. Then the ship came apart from the inside. Not a big external blast, not a dramatic fireball, just a sudden violent failure across multiple internal sections at once, like something had decided the entire structure didn't deserve to stay connected anymore. "What just happened?" somebody whispered. "Boom ball," came the reply, casual as anything. "Little one." Now you could hear it in the comms again, that shift. That edge of disbelief starting to creep in as people tried to process what they'd just seen. because shields weren't supposed to let things through like that, not without a fight, not without some kind of measurable interaction. But these didn't ask permission. They just went where they were pointed. Second shot hit before the first question got answered. Another ship. Different angle, same result. Penetration delay. And then internal collapse, like the thing had been built out of bad decisions and finally gave up. "Jake," the second voice said, "you're drifting your timing again." "I ain't drifting. You're early." "It still worked?" "That ain't the point." "It's always the point." By the third hit, the enemy started to understand. You could see it in the way their formation shifted. Not clean anymore, not confident. Ships pulling back, adjusting angles, trying to compensate for something they didn't have a counter for. Because there wasn't one. Doesn't matter how strong your shield is if the problem starts on the inside. "Caldwell," one of the Terran officers said, voice tight but no longer uncertain, "what exactly are those weapons?" Caldwell didn't answer right away. Then, real calm, like it wasn't worth making a big deal out of, he said, "Old idea. Nobody liked it much." Another enemy ship folded in on itself as a boom ball finished its work. "Seems they're coming around," he added. At that point, the enemy formation didn't just hesitate. It broke. Not a full retreat, not yet, but that perfect, methodical structure they'd been holding on to since the start of the war. It shattered. Ships moving to avoid angles that didn't matter anymore. Point defenses tracking targets they couldn't stop. Command lines stretching thin, trying to adapt to something that didn't follow any rule they understood. And those two little fighters, well, they just kept moving, calm, precise, like they were cleaning up a job that had already been decided. And I remember sitting there watching it all come apart faster than it had taken to build, and I couldn't help but shake my head a little and say to myself, well now, that there's just unfair. Now you'd think after something like that there'd be a whole lot of noise, reports getting filed, admirals demanding answers, somebody somewhere trying real hard to figure out exactly what just happened and how to make it happen again in a more respectable way. And there was some of that, sure enough, comms lighting up with requests for identification, authorization, clarification, all the usual things people ask for when they've just been saved by something they don't understand. Didn't amount to much, because by the time command got around to asking who those ships were and under what authority, they'd just stepped into a losing fight and turned it around. Those old boys were already leaving. No formation, no ceremony, no victory lap. Just turning slow and easy like they'd finished a job that didn't need discussing and weren't about to hang around for the paperwork. "Captain Caldwell," someone called over the command channel, doing their best to sound like they still had hold of the situation. "You are ordered to identify your vessels and remain in position for debrief." There was a pause, just long enough you might have thought he was considering it. Then Caldwell came back, calm as ever. "Son, if I start filling out paperwork now, I'll miss my retirement all over again. You are required to comply." "Appreciate the concern," he said. "We'll let you know if we need anything." And that was that. The Vengeance rolled first, steady and unhurried, easing out of the line like she'd never quite belonged there in the first place. The Sable Finch was harder to track, slipping off angles and disappearing from clean telemetry before most systems could get a solid lock on her. And Mildred drifted sideways for a bit like she was thinking about staying, and then corrected just enough to follow along that strange hum of hers, settling down into something almost content. "Clyde," somebody said over an open channel, "you sure she's going to make it back?" "She made it here," Clyde answered. "That's already exceeding expectations." "That don't sound reassuring." "It ain't meant to." Jake and Riley came in last, their fighters arcing back toward the Vengeance like nothing unusual had happened at all. Just another pass, just another job done. "Next time," Jake said, "we bring more." "Next time," Riley answered, "they won't make the same mistake." "Hope they do." "Yeah," Riley said, "me too." And then they were gone. Signals faded one by one, slipping back into scrap lanes and forgotten routes where ships like that don't officially exist and never quite get written down the way they should. Command tried, of course, filed reports, flagged anomalies, started digging through old registries looking for names that didn't want to be found. But you can't catalog something that don't follow rules, and you sure as hell can't regulate people who stopped caring about regulation a long time ago. As for me, I just sat there a while longer, looking at a battlefield that had been losing a few hours earlier and wasn't anymore, watching Terran ships push that line forward just a little, steady and confident, like they'd remembered who they were, and I couldn't help but smile, because I'd seen it before. New ships, shiny systems, perfect plans, all of it looking real impressive right up until somebody old, stubborn, and just a little bit crazy decides to get involved. And when that happens, well, turns out new and shiny don't always beat old and crazy. That's the story. Now, if you like getting these a little early, memberships are open. Appreciate you either way. If you want more like this, there's more on this channel. And if you feel like sticking around, hit subscribe. My Patreon site is Sci-Fi Signal A J Maraine. Ebooks by A J Maraine are also out there. All right. I'll see you on the next one.